talked about how great your stories are. One thing I have to say is I've always been a big fan of the author Flannery O'Connor, who is a Georgia native, as we all know. And I think that she's been reincarnated in these stories in many ways. Not joking, whenever you publish it, you put it on a blurb. And I really love these stories. They're classical. They're really well tuned in a way, so I love them all. Now I'll go ahead and read this boring bio. It's not boring, but compared to all that I could say. Hope Noel Walker's passion for storytelling is what motivated her to earn a master's degree in professional writing, specializing in creative writing from Kennesaw State University. She previously graduated from Georgia Southern University with a Bachelor of Arts degree, double majoring in English and writing and linguistics. Noel primarily writes literary fiction, and her work has been previously published in Miscellany Magazine of the Arts. She plans on pursuing publication for her short story cycle, Those Living in the Shadow of Death. You better. So thank you, Noel. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. So a little bit about my capstone. So it is a short story cycle centered around broken people finding faith. The title of the collection, Those Living in the Shadow of Death, references Matthew 4:16. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light had dawned. Each story features a character walking through the shadow of death, finding and building on their faith despite the obstacles they face. These characters are all in different stages of their life, but all are lost or broken in some way. The short story cycle essentially aims to answer this question: when it seems like every semblance of hope is lost, how do you keep moving forward? So as a Christian writer, I believe there is a need for more texts that show Christian struggles and how they make it through those dark places without their troubles merely being brushed aside in a method of spiritual bypassing. From personal experience, I've had my faith questioned by other Christians because of my struggles with anxiety. I've been told that if I only pray harder, my anxiety will disappear. However, I believe that faith is just one element of the healing process, and having faith does not necessarily mean your problems vanish. It just means you aren't alone in facing them. I wish I had been exposed to more fiction that openly discussed these experiences, so therefore I believe that incorporating the idea of faith while in the midst of struggle is needed in literature, specifically Christian fiction. So there's really a need to talk about those dark places and how to get through them, because that's what real people and real Christians deal with. So I aim to create a collection of short stories that showcase faith in a genuine, authentic way. So faith is not the only topic in these stories, nor are Christians the only audience. Within my stories, I also aim to show the impact and dynamics of familial relationships, overcoming loss, as well as other common experiences, such as mental health struggles. I aspire to reach a wide audience beyond those who have faith. I want to impact an audience who might be struggling in the same way as my characters and give them a semblance of hope that they too will make it through these dark places, despite living in the shadow of death, no matter how broken they may feel or whether or not they have faith. So the story I'll be reading today is the first part of Those Living in the Shadow of Death, and it jumps back and forth from present to past. Car engines roared as they drove by the boy, each one rattling his bones. He was standing on the edge of the road, hidden in the late night shadows, his breath puffing out in front of him in the crisp, cool air. He was shaking, fingertips trembling. He pulled his thin, brown jacket closer to his body. The boy hated how ugly it was, and he hated that they would find his body wrapped in the color of khakis. He had put on a thick pair of boots and his best jeans, a little ratty, but what could he do? It seemed silly that he had brushed his hair and made himself look presentable for what he was about to do, as if it was something as simple as going to a movie theater or out to the local bar. But he wanted to look semi-decent when they found him, not like someone who couldn't take care of himself or someone who did not deserve to be remembered. The boy hoped someone, somewhere, would remember him. He also wondered when they would find his body. Probably immediately, unless it was a hit and run. If it was a hit and run, it might take a few days. After all, it was Christmas Eve, the loneliest time of the year. The boy had chickened out from the highway. He seemed unable to move, as if his body wasn't listening to what his brain was telling it to do. Now he was at a back road with a wide river a little down the way from him. It was a beautiful view, one he was glad to have as his last. He could see the stars scattered across the sky from here. The boy looked closely, noticing that one shined brighter than others. Fewer cars passed him now. His paper-thin skin weighed him down. He was so tired of thinking, tired of being, but he couldn't think too hard about what was to come. He was afraid he'd back out at the last second. Instead, the boy imagined what was going on in their lives, about what kind of people would be out this early in the morning, or this late at night. I guess it depended on how one looked at it. The boy imagined some were teenagers coming back from a holiday party, their whole lives ahead of them, already choosing to destroy their liver as they took advantage of their youth. Others might be coming into town, perhaps visiting a close friend or parent. Others would still be on the job, transporting cargo on their 18-wheelers. That's what he was looking for, an 18-wheeler. The first time he remembers seeing his mother unconscious was when he was 18 months old. She laid him in his crib, gently placing a plush sheep and a stuffed lion beside him. The child cried because he didn't want to go to bed, but she shushed him and left him there anyway. It was dark outside, and the nightlight plugged into the outlet cast a faint glow in the room, making giant shadows dance on the walls. He tried to entertain himself with the stuffed animals, but quickly lost interest, choosing to scream for his mother instead. He wanted to play with her. He wanted to be in her arms. The only sound that came back was a dull, musical beat that grew louder the more he cried, in a deep voice he'd never heard before. His cries came with brief pauses as he took deep breaths in and released them in the form of a scream, a cacophony. The only response was his mother's laughter coming from the other side of the door. No 18-wheelers came, not even a 16-wheeler or an 8. The boy sat there as the minutes started adding up, building and rising together, creating a stretch of time meant only for him and what he was about to do. He spent some time walking down the road, taking in the dark silhouettes of the tree line. He tried to fill the minutes by watching the stars, 1,000 nightlights scattered in the sky. The boy reached up as if he could touch them, but his fingers fell through the air, as empty as they were the moment before. The longer he waited, the more his heart pounded in his chest. Before he realized it, the boy had come to a bridge. He sighed and turned to look out across the river. The moonlight reflected on the surface, bringing back memories that did nothing but fill him with regret and loneliness. He guessed he could jump off, but he was never a fan of water. Sounded silly, he knew, when you're dead, you're dead, but the boy was going to die the way he wanted, and drowning was not it. He wanted it to be over quickly, and he knew he wouldn't be able to do it by his own hand. That's when he heard it. The engine was loud, not as big as he was hoping for, but he knew it would do the trick. Screw the 18-wheeler, a large car or truck would have to do. He walked a couple hundred feet in front of the bridge and prepared himself. As it got closer, the sound of the engine grew and his heart started pumping harder than it had before as it pushed his blood in and out, trying to keep him alive just as his lungs did with his quick, light breaths in and out, and his fingertips still trembled, and he hated that his last moments on this earth would be filled with fear and panic, not necessarily of dying, but the way he would get there. And visions of his mother flashed in and out throughout his mind until it disappeared completely, and it was just him and the bright headlights of the car getting closer and closer, and he bent down in a runner's post, getting ready to run in front of the car, and he thought to himself that at least the last color he would see would be pure white, and the engine got louder and louder, but all he could hear was his heartbeat thumping in and out of his eardrums, and it got about 30 feet away, and he squeezed his eyes shut and ran out into the middle of the road. The baby had cried until his throat hurt, until the room started to fill in with sunlight, until the noise on the other side of the door had become nothing except silence. He felt alone, lying there. His mother's laughter had long turned to silence. He had angrily thrown his stuffed sheep across the room during the night, so his only company was the lion, which now stared back at him. The lion's mane was maroon, and he couldn't help but glance in its dull, dark eyes. The child felt trapped and unable to break through the wooden bars of his prison. He was wearing light blue footy pajamas with snowflakes. The baby stuck his plump arm in between the gap of the two bars towards the sheep he had thrown. The sheep laid on its side, staring at him, almost as if it was asking, "Why'd you do this to me?" He knew he had to get it back, to hold it close, to gently kiss its head and tell it he was sorry and that it never happened again. The child pulled himself up, feeling uncomfortable and on the verge of tears, and finally stood, the top of his head barely peeping over the crib. He used all of his strength, face crimson, and hoisted his body over the edge, first an arm and then a leg, and then he fell with a thud on the ground. The fall caused him to lose the air in his lungs for a moment, and he laid there in shock. His shoulder caught the brunt of the impact, and he found he couldn't move his arm without the feeling of 1,000 needles jutting through it. Silent tears ran down his face. Then he slowly dragged himself forward with his good arm towards the lamb. When the baby finally made it to the plush animal, he held it tightly against him with his good arm, the other becoming nothing more than a ligature. The small room seemed so large, and the door was still closed, and silence still seeped in under the door's crack, and he didn't understand why the only person he knew, the only person he loved and depended on, did not come for him. He was angry and sad and confused and alone. He released a scream deep from his lungs. It was the baby's painful welcoming into the world. There was no impact, there was no pain, there was no car jamming into his side, crushing the boy like an aluminum can someone tosses into the garbage. He released a breath and his heartbeat slowed. He didn't know if what he was feeling was relief or disappointment, maybe a little of both. He opened his eyes to see a large black truck veer off the road and onto the grass, missing the bridge completely and going straight for the river. He felt something very different than he had a few seconds earlier. This was a different kind of fear, the kind he could do nothing about, forced to watch something he caused take away someone else's life, someone else's choice. It stripped every other emotion inside of him away. He was unable to do anything but watch and curse and regret his decision. The truck skidded, grass flying out from beneath the tires until it stopped, only a breath away from plunging into the lake. He stayed silent and took a few steps closer. The driver put the truck in reverse and rode backwards before stopping right beside him. A short, young woman got out of the driver's seat and slammed the door. She had crimson hair and tattoos covering her arms, and he could tell she was young, probably mid, maybe late 20s. The woman had worry lines etched into her face, lines he knew all too well, and he could tell that the few years she'd been on this earth had aged her. She had a white beaded bracelet with a small cross charm wrapped around her wrist. He watched as she yanked her fingers through her hair and started pacing, vocalizing a long string of profanities. She looked at him. I'm sorry, he sputtered. She stopped walking and leaned down, putting her hands on her knees as she took deep breaths. He stood there awkwardly, putting his hands in and out of his pockets, unsure of what he could or should say. She looked back up at him. "You're sorry?" She released a hollow, sharp laugh. "Were you trying to kill me?" "No, of course not. Then what the hell were you doing running in front of my truck in the middle of the night?" He stayed quiet. She stopped her cursing long enough to study him, the kid with the raggedy khaki-colored coat and a pair of scuffed shoes, panic and relief playing on his face, both emotions living as one beside each other. "You were trying to die?" He stood there, not answering. "Cat got your tongue?" She prodded. He shrugged his shoulders. She waited a moment, the look of panic slowly draining away as her heartbeat slowed back down. The headlight of her truck illuminated her hair, making it look like she was on fire. Her arms were inked with images and words, as if she had to put it all down in a place she'd never lose it, as if she needed reminders of her thoughts and feelings and images day in and day out. "Get in," she said, turning around and getting back in her truck. "What?" "You heard me." He looked closely at the woman as she sat in the front seat and restarted her engine. He swayed back and forth from his heels to the balls of his feet, watching the breath cloud in front of him, deciding if he should go with her. She rolled down her window. "You just gonna stand there all night?" "Why should I get in the car?" he asked, voice trembling. She raised her eyebrow. not to sound like an ass, but what else do you have to lose?